Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Agus ag usual to anna sorm bheith seo harish scoil vicula agus gormaga Joe as Upton Curra come Lorch and Shaw. Before I start, I should indicate that I got my first ministerial directive this afternoon. I had a lovely tie for you all, but the minister insisted that there be parity of esteem on the stage. So now you know it's not disrespect on my part. Ladies and gentlemen, education is highly valued by Irish people. And as we live through this period of unprecedented challenges to our nation, the role of education in determining our collective future in both societal and economic terms was never more important. Our fundamental values, our creativity, our innovation, our economic prosperity, and the quality of our shared society will all rely heavily on the quality of our education system. And it too is facing very serious challenges and significant changes both nationally and internationally. A high-quality education system will be central to Ireland's societal and economic recovery. Moreover, faced with our current economic situation, we in education have a particular responsibility to innovate in order to transform our education system in a manner that moulds a new generation of graduates that will deliver a new Ireland. Properly prepared, our greatest national and natural resource is the intellectual capital emerging from our education system. This afternoon I'm going to explore briefly the link between education and economic prosperity. I will analyse what an excellent education system means in the 21st century, but in particular I will focus on three key elements of our education system that critically need to be addressed if we are to create a sustainable platform for future prosperity. Let me first deal briefly with the issue of economic prosperity. There's a pretty strong correlation between education and economic strength, and much of this is self-evident. You won't be able to see the details of this slide too well, but basically the vertical axis is actually the graduate at the tertiary level enrolment ratio in countries, and the x-axis is GDP. And you can see the general trend as you have greater enrolment in third level, GDP goes up. A more sophisticated analysis, however, by Hanashek at Stanford University has produced some very important conclusions. Detailed evidence in his analysis shows that it is the quality of education, and in this case measured on the basis of cognitive skills developed, that has most effect. Most publicised reports on this issue concentrate solely on the level of education attainment, or perhaps the quantity of schooling or education, and this simply distorts the analysis and really misses the point. We need to focus on more qualitative outputs. So the quality of education is causally related to economic outcomes. A more skilled population, including both a broadly educated population and a cadre of top performers, results in stronger economic performance for nations. So it's not about maximising throughput, it's about optimising quality. But an education system should be about more than economic prosperity. In addressing the role of an education system, I believe it should focus on the individual student and emphasise that the primary purpose is to enable students to flourish, and I'm using the Maureen Gaffney flourishing concept, in the challenging world of the 21st century, in their personal lives, in civic society and in the workplace. In enabling students to flourish and realise their full potential, we seek to stimulate curiosity and creativity, foster a sense of wonder, and as Noam Chomsky put it in a recent interview, education should be about encouraging creative exploration, independence of thought, and willingness to cross frontiers. It should be about enabling people to learn on their own. So what makes an excellent education system? Any discussion about the best education systems worldwide almost inevitably emphasise Finland as an example. And why is this? Finnish students have consistently scored among the top in the world on standardised tests such as PISA, the Programme for International Student Assessment, but it goes way beyond that. Finland ranks number 3 in the world for economic competitiveness, number 4 in the world in the Global Innovation Index, and number 1 in the world for technological advancement. So it's pretty apparent they're doing something right in their education system. But while learning from Finland, we have to acknowledge that cultural and societal differences can play a large part. Benchmarking against countries such as Finland does not, of course, mean we have to copy everything exactly, but it does mean we can learn from them and adapt what we learn for our own purposes. Let's examine Finland for a minute. Following the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, Finland, which was then predominantly an agrarian economy, experienced a very severe recession, quite similar to the one that Ireland's going through at the moment. Unemployment climbed from 3% to 18% in 2 years. GDP dropped 13% at the same time, and Finnish public spending reached close to 70% of the overall state budget. And yet, in the midst of this, the Finnish government bravely decided that increased investment in education was the pathway out of that. The result? Finland quickly emerged from recession, built a highly skilled workforce, and today boasts one of the finest education systems of in the world. So what are the characteristic features of the Finnish system? Many would turn to Pasi Sahlberg in this regard. Pasi Sahlberg is the guru of Finnish education and travels around the world telling the story. But he says the success of the Finnish system is based on three things: improving the teaching force, limiting student testing to a necessary minimum, and placing responsibility and trust before accountability in that system. Teachers in Finland go through a rigorous selection process, and then after 5 years of study, all teachers have at least a master's degree in education and their subject area of expertise. There is high confidence in teachers and trust, and principals are regarded as respected professionals and significant leaders. Children, too, are not subject to examinations until the end of schooling, that's around the age of 19. And of course, they all work towards that final examination, but the absence of high-stakes testing in the intermediate years gives them the space to explore, discover, learn and absorb, and to find their own interests and abilities. In Finland, and this is very important, there is relatively little stress in the education system, and private tuition does not exist. When school ends, so do the lessons. So could we imagine here a system without grinds? A grind system that is estimated to be worth between 20 and 40 million a year here in Ireland. So there's lots we can learn and contextualise in the Irish situation. So let's look at the situation for Ireland. What are the key issues for us? Although there are many good things happening, examples being the junior cycle reform, the creation of the institutes of education and so on, and I'm sure I know the Minister will talk about some of those good things in his own speech. But today I want to focus on three major problems that need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. In each of these three cases, I will highlight the problem, but I will also recommend solutions. In the first of these, I want to talk about the concept of attributes and assessment. Students today live in an entirely different world to the one that existed 10 or even 5 years ago. It's dramatically different. I believe that we must develop a new type of rounded, innovative graduate for this rapidly changing society. They must be able to compete effectively in a global marketplace. They must be able to create their own future. And such is the pace of change and unpredictability of the future that one of the key characteristics that will be important here is the adaptability to change. Adaptability. So in addition to the disciplinary knowledge in our education system, we must equip our students with a set of personal skills that will enable them to navigate the particular challenges of the coming decades. Skills such as leadership, creativity, critical thinking, innovative problem solving, entrepreneurial principles, importantly, sense-making of information, what you might call digital literacy, or more important, digital intelligence, and global awareness. These 21st century attributes should supplement, not supplant, the disciplinary expertise and insight inherent in any formal learning, and should be underpinned by core competencies in literacy and numeracy. The paradigm of a job for life has to shift to that of lifetime employability, with a particular emphasis on these generic skills, including adaptability. It is imperative, therefore, that such skills are integrated into every level of the education continuum and developed in a consistent and coherent manner. It is quite strange in that context that there is no overall strategy in place for our education system. We need to establish such a strategy that would take a system-level view of what we want to achieve for all our students right along the system, and ensure that at all stages of the continuum of education that they are acting coherently with common objectives. Any discussion around this issue of developing attributes in students brings us logically to the critical issue of assessment. And this statement here, what you assess is what you get. If you don't test it, you won't get it. These are the words of psychologist Lauren Resnick, first quoted in a seminal paper in 1990, and they appear time and time again in the educational literature. Stated another way, the nature and focus of assessments used in education drive both the learning and teaching behaviour. We all understand and probably have experienced the concept of teaching to the test, and any of us involved in education know that students only take seriously those topics that are assessed regularly in examinations. If we want to develop specific attributes in our students, we need to assess those attributes. 2 years ago I came to MacGill and I focused on one major issue in particular in education, and that was the combination of the Leaving Certificate and the CAO points. And I highlighted this as the greatest negative feature in our education system because of the negative impact it had on teaching and learning behaviour right through second level, promoting rote learning and regurgitation, for example. Since then, and with the encouragement of the Minister, the universities who own the CAO system have been actively engaged in transforming the point system, and major changes are on their way in the near future. But the other side of that equation needs to follow quickly. The high-stakes, single-terminal examination approach that is the Leaving Certificate is really more appropriate to the 19th century, not the 21st century. It is not appropriate for a modern, innovative knowledge society. What is the point of testing memory powers in our students when at the flick of a switch they can Google any key piece of information they need? So how are we going to change things or turn things around in this context? As a matter of urgency, and I would say before the full rollout of the new junior cycle curriculum happens, we need to establish a major national resource in assessment, carrying out research and policy development in innovations in assessment methodology. Such a resource, which would play a key role in both teacher education, curriculum development and in national examinations, has the potential to have a major transformative impact on our education system and in particular on the quality of learning within it. The second point I want to make about our system is around the concept of digital learning. The world of education is undergoing a revolution. We are undergoing a transition from teaching and learning based on the 15th century technology of the printed word to the 21st century interactive technologies that offer the potential for enhanced, adaptive and personalised learning. People born after 1990 have never known a life without the internet. These are the digital natives. These are the Google generation. And digital technology is as integral to their learning as it is to their social lives. Let me give just some brief examples of the impact of this revolution. At Stanford Medical School today, 70% of formal instruction now takes place online. 70% at Stanford. In 2015, 9 out of 10 of every job will require full competencies in e-skills, digital literacy, digital intelligence. The president of Stanford University, John Hennessy, likened the impact of digital technology to a tsunami coming to the education system. And let me quote one other person, Clayton Christensen, whom I know was mentioned as he's the guru of disruptive innovation mentioned earlier in the week. He has likened the revolution in digital learning to the disruptive innovation of the education system. In this new world, there is potential to significantly enhance the learning experience of our students. In this new world, the role of the educator changes dramatically. That educator is much more of a personal tutor, but also a curator of the quality content, the rich quality content available to enhance learning. And what are we doing with this in Ireland? Do we have a strategy for digital learning? No, we don't. The Minister for Communications, Energy and Natural Resources, Pat Rabbitte, recently launched the National Digital Strategy, and education and e-learning is one of the three strands within that. It highlights the rollout of 100 megabytes per second broadband to post-primary schools, to all post-primary schools. This is helpful, but it's akin to building a road to the school and forgetting what happens thereafter in the absence of a national digital learning strategy. And I have to say it's somewhat ironic that the biggest development in digital learning in this country in the past 5 years has come from an 18-year-old just after his leaving cert, James Welton, founding coder Jojo. And he says to himself, I only got 370 points in my leaving cert, which tells us something about that as well. But that is dramatically changing learning of over 10,000 children every weekend. We need to do a lot more in this space, or we risk sleepwalking through the greatest revolution in education history. So I would encourage the Minister to establish a national digital learning strategy and implementation plan as a matter of urgency. So in my last few minutes I want to focus on one last point which I think is critically important, and it's probably the one closest to my own heart, but certainly closest to my own job. I mentioned earlier that there's a strong correlation between economic prosperity of a nation and the quality of its education system. And the university plays a particular important role in this regard in areas such as developing the highly skilled human capital that meets the skill needs of a knowledge society, carrying out high quality research that creates the platform for innovation and supports entrepreneurship, and that supports the attraction and retention of foreign direct investment. And there are many examples over the past years of success in that regard. In the interest of time, I won't go through those, but I will mention that in a survey carried out this year by the HA in conjunction with IBEC, the companies looked at the quality of graduates coming out of our system, and over 75% expressed confidence about graduates having the right workplace and transferable skills, and together with the relevant disciplinary knowledge to support them. So while these indicators endorse the role and impact of Irish universities, we should not be complacent, because on the ground in our institutions, serious alarm bells are sounding. There is grave concern they're sliding down a quality precipice from which it will be very difficult and very slow to return. And why is this? Well, to answer this, we have to look at the combined financial and demographic issues facing the third level sector. There's the stark numbers. There's 1.5 billion euros of your money spent on the third level sector, and that's addressing the needs of 170,000 students at the moment. In the period from 2008-2011, core exchequer resources into the universities fell by approximately 7%, and more recently we've seen further reductions of a further 7%. But the real dramatic picture comes when you look at this graph here, and you don't need honours maths to see the implications of this. The blue curve tells you the current and solid projections of student numbers coming into the third level sector, and this comes from a July 2013 Department of Education and Skills report. The red curve shows you the exchequer investment into the university sector. You don't need to be a genius to work out that that's an unsustainable future. You, at some stage, hit the quality threshold. You cannot keep doing this. And we believe in the university sector that we're at that point already. So what should we do? Above all else, we must continue to pursue standards of the highest quality and excellence across our system. It's all we have to protect ourselves and drive our future. And I know Bridget will be saying a lot more about the quality system in her speech. We cannot simply continue to ignore the fact that the current funding model for higher education is broken. We already have a highly massified system. Over 65% of all of our secondary school students go on to third level, and one which in macro terms is highly efficient in terms of the scale and quality of its outputs. That system has already shown significant elasticity in increasing outputs with declining exchequer financial inputs, but it cannot be infinitely elastic. In physics terms, we have crossed or are close to crossing the elastic limit of our system. We urgently need a new model. Without it, we are condemning ourselves to a race to the bottom. None of us, neither the Minister nor institutional leaders, want that as our legacy. None of us want to preside over a slide into mediocrity, which is inevitable if we do nothing. The additional resources required to meet demand and support quality can be provided by one or more of the following three options, and I'll finish briefly on this, Don, if you don't mind. None of the three options I'm going to mention is ideal or particularly palatable, but we are faced with Hobson's choice. We either want an appropriate, high-quality education system for our children and for our future, or we let it slide into mediocrity. The first of these, option A, is increased student contribution, and the rationale for this option is that the funding of higher education should reflect both the public benefit and the private returns to the individual. Funding should therefore entail an appropriate cost sharing between the Exchequer and the student. And if we accept the fact that the state has no more resources to give for now, then we are faced with the inevitable conclusion that the solution lies in increased private investment. In order to deliver this option, we are likely to need a loan system whereby the repayment of loans only begins after the student has left higher education and the amount to be paid depends on his or her income. These are so-called income contingent loans. Option B, and this will be really popular with you, is increased income tax. The rationale for this option is that higher education is a public good and drives our society and our economy to benefit all. In order to highlight this aspect, such an increase should be an additional hypothecated tax, clearly expressed, for example, as a higher education levy, not as a generalised increase. The third option is one that is slightly more sophisticated and we believe is probably the one that will attract most attention. And it's a public-private hybrid higher education institutions. And it requires an agreement on the appropriate unit of resource per student required to drive a high-quality higher education system. Consequently, in this model, the current Exchequer funding base would only be capable of supporting a specific, limited number of students, which would be automatically lower than the current number attending higher education institutions, because it's underfunded at the moment. Under this model, one would need to specify clearly the profile of students benefiting from state funds. In particular, and this is a fundamental principle for us, in order to preserve the equity of access principle, one could give priority to students from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Institutions would then be allowed to charge full economic cost fees for those additional places over and above the Exchequer-funded cohort. Under this model, and allowing for access initiatives, the quota of state-funded places would be allocated in the normal way via the point system, with such students paying the normal charges. Now, there are all sorts of issues around each of those. As I say, none of them is palatable. None of them would be particularly agreeable to everybody. But it is important that we take on one or more of those to address what we believe is a fundamental problem. So I'll finish by saying this, and I feel this every day. Being involved in education for all of us, you realise it's both a privilege and a responsibility. There is no better satisfaction than engaging with students of all ages, and watching their life expand, their intellect expand. But it's also a huge responsibility in terms of shaping their futures. And a high-quality education system is crucial for all of us if we wish to provide a sustainable platform for all of those, for all of our children, for all of our futures, and to sustain our return to prosperity. And the actions I have recommended this afternoon, to my mind, are crucial if we are to create an appropriate platform. Gura míle maith.